All right, guys, you have to tell me if you're having a hard time hearing me, but I will try to speak up. Thank you guys for joining us today. We're almost at 200, so we're looking like we're going to have about the same amount as we had yesterday. And so if you're joining us, I'm sure you already know this is the second webinar for the course Risk Evaluation, First Step in Disaster Planning. And this course is a part of the series called Caring for Yesterday's Treasures Today, which has been made possible by the Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And we're so fortunate. Hope is with us from Learning Times, and Learning Times is on board to help us produce these webinars and to also provide support on our website. Let me pull up this slide of our schedule. So again, today, our webinar, we have a great one in store for you. It's Earth, Wind, and Fire, Identifying External Hazards to Your Collections. And after this webinar, we have two more next Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock. Will be our last ones, and in the same place that you are here. And then just a quick reminder, to earn a certificate, we check a couple of things. And I'm going to try to speak up, guys. Sorry, you're having a hard time hearing me. So to earn the certificate of completion, you must be registered, so you're in our database. We ask that you turn in a permission form and that you submitted all 4 homework assignments. And we're asking that you turn those in by February 21st. So email us if you have any questions about that. Now, everything you could possibly ever need for this course is on our Risk Evaluation course webpage. The link is above, and you'll see links to the homework assignments. You'll see the PowerPoint slides, and you'll see all the resources that have come up based on the webinars. And we try to keep those updated. So, for example, last course we had a lot of questions about responding to the media. And so we have now put up there some resources that you can check out. So we'll keep those coming and keep those updated. And again, you can find everything you need for this course. Now you hopefully noticed after Tuesday that you got an email from us with a recording of Tuesday's webinar. And you should get this email after each course. So we hope to have this next one out by the end of the day today. We are keeping the recordings just limited to you guys, everyone who is registered for these courses, and we'll eventually post them all to our website so that everyone has access to them. But right now it's just you guys, and so you should be getting these emails. If you're not getting these emails, there might be a few reasons for that. The emails are coming from heritagepreservation.org, and the email address is info@heritagepreservation.org. If you're not getting them, there are 2 reasons. We might be ending up in your spam filter, so check that out. The other reason, we're only sending these to people who are registered for this course. So if you have a question about if you're registered or why you might not be getting this email, shoot us an email at info@heritagepreservation.org and we can figure it out. So we have Alex again with us today, and I'm going to move this Say Hello Here chat box over and move over that moderated chat. Again, as Hope said, you'll type in your question. If it's an issue, a tech issue, we can answer you privately so no one else can see it. But when we do publish your post so that everyone can see, you'll see your comment twice. So don't worry, you're not spamming the chat box. It's just all a part of the system. So let me move this out of the way. And Alex, I will get your slide up.
Thank you, Jenny.
And the presentation, please feel free to type in questions as they come to you, and we'll hold on to them. And as soon as we have a break, we'll try to get to them. And Alex, it's all you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And welcome to everybody. It's heartening to see so many people are back. So I want to say aloha to Honolulu as we go as far as New Zealand, all the other way to Sweden and Aberdeen this time. I was just in Glasgow. I have family actually in Aberdeen, and down to Belize, and then there are people in Alaska and also the 48 states. So I'm hoping you're going to have a good time here. This is a pretty dense presentation today, so make sure you have your coffee and your tea with you. I hope I have some interesting slides that prompt some questions, and we'll try to get going because with more than 4.8 billion artifacts held in American institutions, you know, America's heritage has a lot at risk. And this includes 1.7 billion rare and unique books, periodicals, and scrapbooks. We've got 800 million natural specimens and 700 million photographs, 200 million archaeological artifacts, and for you guys with historic stuff, we have 48 million historic objects and 21 million paintings, sculptures, and works of decorative art. So, as we noted on Tuesday, with 80% of collecting institutions not having an emergency plan or one that's fluid in their heads, we have a lot at risk. So this webinar, I hope, will begin to help you identify those hazards that are external to your building and site. The better you can identify the hazards and understand the effect they could have on your site, the more proactive you can be to take measures to minimize that costly damage and loss of collections.
You are now muted.
That'll save lives. It'll save collections and a lot of money, so your trustees will be happy. And more than anything else, it'll give you more time to do the things that you really like to do. So let's see what the webinar goals today. The goals are to identify a range of natural and man-made hazards that affect your collections. Now, there are so many disasters out there, you can really become paralyzed trying to address them all. Now, I'm just going to put some common examples in front of you to get you thinking about the types of incidents you can prudently consider. Once you've made a list of hazards that are sort of lurking around you, then we'll go into the process of evaluating how each one can affect your site and what the probability might be. That's the beginning of the process of risk management. And I'll talk more about that later in this webinar and then again in the fourth webinar. And then later on today, another goal, we're going to identify the resources to find out which kind of these hazards are at risk to affecting your resources and your region. It's, I think, sort of a fun exercise to go searching on the web to discover really what lurks in your backyard. I'm also going to expand on a topic we touched on yesterday on how to build better relationships with your local first responders and your emergency management officials. They are definitely the primary support resource for you. So I want to be sure that you're comfortable knowing how to approach them. I'll give you some pointers on the kinds of questions to ask them and the kinds of questions they might ask you in return, just to prepare you. So while I'm jabbering away, you're looking at these images probably, and you're wondering what's going on in these examples. The top example is a man-made hazard from a cooking fire in an
Would you like your guests to be able to unmute their own lines by pressing *6? If yes, press 1. If no, all guests have been muted. You will now rejoin the meeting.
In preparation for all the staff going to the town Thanksgiving Day parade. Sometime during the time they were away, some sort of ember strayed away, flew out the chimney, and stuck in the thatched roof. So the fire smoldered for a while and then burst into flames just about the time everyone, including most of the fire department, was marching down along the parade route. I'd say, what a way to start your feast day. Now, to give you an idea, that really had a low probability of happening, but it certainly had a high damage effect. And then the natural hazard image below that is called a haboob. It's an Arabian term for wicked wind. Now, these weather events whip tremendous dust storms, driving particles into our buildings and our mechanical systems, or our ductwork. The National Weather Service indicates Phoenix gets them on average of 3 a year. Now, that would be considered a high probability, at least in Phoenix, and the effect would depend on how tightly your building was sealed. So maybe in a modern building, the effect would be moderately low. But in a more lightly enclosed structure, it could be moderately high. So I saw we actually have a participant from Phoenix. So I've probably just done your homework. I think you're probably saying, yes. So we'll go to the next slide. So let's jump into the fire with man-made disasters here. Man-made disasters are events that are either intentional or unintentional threats to public health and safety. Since man-made disasters are unpredictable, they pose a really difficult threat that must be handled with awareness and proper preparedness and reaction. They can affect all of you, whether you're in a large public or university library or in a tiny all-volunteer historic site. No matter where you are, man-made hazards can affect you. Now, all of the hazards I have listed here, from utility outages to failures of dams and power plants, are at risk of having a terrible impact on your facility and your collections. You may have had experience on a personal level in your community with one or more of these, maybe during a power outage. I'm probably going to get a power outage probably over this weekend with the blizzard coming through. Now, for those of you along the Gulf, however, you may be more familiar than you wish with that oil rig spill. After the Deepwater Horizon rig accident, oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico for over 3 months. While much attention has focused on the disaster affecting natural resources, many cultural resources were threatened as well, including archaeological sites, ranging from historic shipwrecks to stone wharfs to coastal Native American camps. While sites on the Gulf Coast were most at risk, sites on the Florida coastline also felt the impact. Now, oil spills, like most man-made hazards, are dangerous to our cultural resources in a variety of ways. Contamination can not only degrade and cause physical loss to the sites, but also may affect dating techniques. Additionally, improper cleanup methods and high traffic to the area to either inspect or to clean up can cause more damage to the site than the oil itself. So that's one example there. On the other hand, at the other end of the list are civil and political demonstrations that may happen in the vicinity of your site. Political risks may feel extreme to you, but the country really is a hotbed of political arguments and public demonstrations as we struggle with economic and political concerns. Libraries and cultural sites on primary routes into or out of town are particularly at risk due to their proximity to demonstration routes. Think, too, of what happens in the cities around the world that lose a notable sports event. In this image, the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pennsylvania anticipated the risk to potentially disruptive demonstrations from one of the international economic summits and implemented actions to protect the building facade. Their emergency preparedness plan was to cover the glass windows, box the outdoor sculpture, and turn off the fountain in preparation for marches. Now, we all know that the risk of fire is always present, and everyone, I hope, is aware of the very costly or even total destruction they can cause. It's why fire suppression systems are a priority for all institutions. But fires don't always start due to a malfunction in our building that a sprinkler system can put out. Sometimes they are from intentional or accidental external sources. Courthouses, town archives, and libraries have a history of being especially susceptible to this kind of threat. Here are just two examples. For this New England historic landmark building on the left, a fire was discovered around 3:30 in the morning by happenstance as a policeman was returning to his home after he had just gone off duty. The cause of the fire was arson. That makes it a crime scene that limits your accessibility to the building while the fire chief conducts procedures to document the evidence. In addition, in this case, the fire was really hard to control, and within 12 hours, before the ashes were really cold, this landmark building was declared unsafe by the fire marshal and demolished. A working relationship with your first responders, in this case, might have allowed enough time to bring in preservation professionals to assess other options besides demolition. And a working relationship with the first responders would have clued them in about bringing out priority items during the initial firefighting efforts when the building was still safe to enter, by the first responders, that is. The fire to the landmark courthouse on the right was caused by welders during a renovation project. A spark smoldered overnight and erupted into a fire right before dawn, destroying extensive genealogy archives and the entire collection of the first floor Chatham Historical Society that was sharing space in that building. The highest risk of fire for most places is from renovation projects. A plan can help you mitigate the risk of a fire due to renovations by setting protocols for the storage of workman equipment at night and how the site is cleaned and inspected at the end of work periods. You can also consider temporary smoke monitors to place them close to the working areas and even inside the walls in the areas that they're working on. So fire is a pretty terrific man-made hazard. Now, as we saw in the oil rig image, you can also consider risks from emergencies that occur at distance from your site, but can still directly impact your site. Examples of these man-made threats are usually caused by explosions, chemical spills, or fires from nearby facilities such as an airport, industrial plant, gas or propane filling stations, mines, railroads, or a harbor. The hazardous emissions from these incidents become airborne and contaminate the neighborhoods downwind of the event. So if you're downwind of something like this, do take note when you go to sort of see what's lurking outside of your doors in your neighborhood. If those acidic airborne residues enter your building, they can cling to the surfaces of uncovered or unprotected collections, and they can accelerate and advance chemical and physical degradation. These kinds of incidents can also require you to evacuate to be safe from fumes and chemical exposures. And the explosions can also produce a powerful physical shock that can affect your building. So as part of your investigations for your homework, and we're going to be having you look into what man-made hazards you might have outside and in your area, think about looking where the propane filling stations are near you. Either the kind used to fill up your propane tanks for grilling in the summer, or for those who are hardy, you guys in the winter, or the ones that are used to fill tanks for home heating. Here in Rhode Island, we have had 2 propane leaks in the past year, requiring evacuation of all buildings within a half-mile radius until the leak was contained and the repairs completed. This required instantly knowing what to do to secure the building to the best of your ability before you evacuated the building. So if you identify these hazards, part of your risk evaluation and preparedness plan might be including covering or putting collections you are working on away in response. It might also include a shelter-in-place plan if first responders order you to stay inside until the incident has been contained and air is cleared. So that could be if you have to be there overnight, where are you going to sleep? Do you have food? Do you have water? You got to think of those things for a shelter-in-place plan. Now, when you think of man-made hazards, how might these affect you? The aging of the U.S. infrastructure of dams and our electrical grid are inherent hazards across the country. Dams built over the last 150 years were constructed using then current construction techniques and seismic knowledge of the time, and many without the benefit of government regulation. Dams built to hold the water in reservoirs can be damaged due to a huge storm, an associated runoff, an earthquake, slope failures, like landslides, or a terrorism event. That's what FEMA's really worried about now. Understanding the impact of a dam failure and if your facility is in the path of the water is critical for 2 reasons. One, their catastrophic failure can cause many fatalities and destroy any cultural resource that's downstream from the facility. And the second part is the storage capacity is lost, which may affect the availability of water at your facility, even if you're not directly affected by the dam failure. So see if you have any dams. Where are your reservoirs in your areas? Now, the U.S. electrical grid is massive but also aging. Utility outages can seriously affect your site and shut down not just telecommunication networks and water supply, but your ability to regulate your heating and cooling systems. This would be especially harmful for collections in the warmer climates of the South, or those specialty collections that require very cold storage to preserve them, such as nitrate negatives and some botanical and biological scientific collections. Having backup generators is a really good preparedness step to mitigate this risk. So let me break for a little bit of water here. Jenny, is this a good time maybe to have a poll?
Sure, yeah, let's give your voice a quick second rest. So we are just curious if any of you out there, we're now up to 235 participants, if you've experienced a man-made hazard and or disaster. And so we've listed here all the ones that Alex has gone over, and of course given you the option to click other. And I'll give this a second and we'll see, hopefully the answer is no, which it looks like the majority is no, but a lot of utility outages.
You always want to know what the others are.
Oh, yeah. Feel free to share in the Q&A box. I'll give this just a couple more seconds. And Alex, do you have a few questions on fire suppression, but we'll get to that at our next break.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, I want to take all of these because I'm also going to be we're going to be working into natural hazards. And I'll be glad to take all of those questions then.
Great. So it looks like 99 people said no. A lot of people had utility outages. A few people mentioned fires, highway transportation disruptions, dam failures, and we have 34 people who say other, so feel free to share in the Q&A box what other might mean. All right, Alex, I'm going to pull this back over.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I'd love to know what the other really means there. I'm always collecting pictures and stories, so if you ever want to email me about any of your stories, feel free to. My email contact will be in the last slide. So in the first few slides here, we went through what man-made hazards can do. Natural hazards can also cause some pretty big incidents that have long-reaching recovery needs and costs. The image you see here is it's a heartbreaking picture of the devastation to the Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico in 2011. This was the fourth major fire in 13 years to scorch the Santa Clara Pueblo lands. It was then further devastated by floods from the seasonal monsoons. The forested areas included dozens of protected cultural sites, and many of those areas were not accessible for months, and some will not be really accessible for years. This may be an example of the types of more frequent and intense weather patterns that forecasters are alerting us to. In 2012, record-breaking extreme weather events occurred in each of the 50 states. We saw the hottest March on record in the contiguous U.S., and July was the hottest single month ever recorded in these lower 48 states. Spring and summer aren't the whole story, though. 2012 is very likely to be the warmest year overall ever recorded in the U.S., so it does seem the trends may be changing. And why is this important to us? It's because extreme weather events inflict tremendous recovery costs if you're affected by them, and your probability of being affected is increasing. So I'm hoping to encourage you here to get your head out of the sand and not be an ostrich anymore, and to keep strengthening your plan and getting all of your staff to work, or as many as you can, to work with you. So we're in the season of snow for some of us. We've got that blizzard coming here to me probably in the next 24 hours starting. Let me start a discussion about natural weather events with blizzards and hail. And again, I just want to get you thinking about the types of weather patterns and what type of damage they could cause to your site. Now a blizzard, as those of you who have snow, I understand in Australia that if they have any snow on the ground, it's considered a blizzard. But here, a blizzard is a severe snowstorm that's characterized by strong winds and low temperatures. In addition to extensive power outages that affect us for days and potentially for those burst pipes, blizzard force winds and snow can cause devastating damage to your building envelope, either through trees falling down or collapsing roofs. A notable case at the Baltimore Museum in this slide illustrates the power and destruction of these winter storms. In the early morning of February in 2003, heavy snow from the President's Day storm collapsed half of the roof of the museum's roundhouse. The museum suffered heavy damage, not only to the roundhouse itself, but also to the collections within the roundhouse. Some of those items were damaged beyond repair. This is not an isolated event, and these events are not just relegated to the East Coast. They're all over. So as part of your risk evaluations for your homework, be mindful, especially if you have flat roofs. That'll hold a lot of snow, and if your snow is wet, that's an enormous amount of weight. That if you have any structural failures, or you're in an old building where you weren't perhaps built up to current codes, it can really stress your roof system. Now, often accompany severe weather events like blizzards, you can find hail. The nation's areas of greatest hail are along and just east of central Rocky Mountain, where it averages actually 6 to 12 hail days per year. So you lucky guys in Colorado there. But hail does also occur, albeit less frequently, but still damaging amounts even in the southeastern U.S., like Florida, and in the warm Southwest, in places like Arizona and California. So do think about what your hail risk is and what the probability might be of it happening. Because in the past year, I love this, the Ice House Museum in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, you guys in Iowa seem to have a lot of hazards come your way, and the Missouri Botanical Garden, and the 45th Infantry Division Museum in Oklahoma City suffered extensive damage and costly damage from hail. In the warm climate of Dallas, the Dallas Arboretum and Sculpture Park, that's in Texas, 6 of the sturdy 30 glass lily pads by the American artist Dale Chihuly were destroyed by hail the size of quarters. So as part of your preparedness phase of your plan, this planning part we're going through now, understanding the different levels of winter weather advisories is a good practice. Understanding them allows you to anticipate the preparedness actions needed to protect your site from these hazardous winter conditions. For instance, here in New England, we have moved from a storm watch to a blizzard warning with a prediction of up to 2 feet of snow. Right now, we're checking our pipe insulations, and this year's mitigation action was installing backflow valves to help protect us if we have any frozen pipes. We're also double-checking our generators to make sure they will turn on. Now, often in the vicinity of severe hail are tornadoes. While tornadoes occur in many parts of the world, they are found most frequently in the United States. An average of 1,253 tornadoes occur in the U.S. each year. The only place that has no tornadoes, recorded at least, is in Hawaii. And I guess that's another reason to live in paradise. Most tornado-related damages result from wind velocity and wind-blown debris, as well as large hail again. With more frequent severe weather events, tornadoes are becoming more familiar in areas that have not seen activity in many decades, if at all. For example, while the Branson Auto Museum in the Midwest is located in part of the country prone to tornado and suffered damage, as you can see in this image, the Barnum Museum on the coast in Bridgeport, Connecticut, also suffered multi-million dollar damage from tornadoes just this past year. Tornadoes in New England are rare, about 1 every 50 years, and they have occurred in the hills farther north along the border of Connecticut and Massachusetts, not on the flat coastline. So this is an example of a low probability, but one with a high effect. So I encourage you to know your region's history of tornado activity, because it will help you assess the probability. And you can start by looking at the Tornado History Project. The website is on the bottom of this slide, and it also is in your packet. So you can maybe use that to learn more. Now, lightning is another a natural weather hazard. It's one of the oldest observed natural phenomena on Earth. It can be seen in volcanic eruptions, extreme intense forest fires, surface nuclear detonations, heavy snowstorms, in large hurricanes, and obviously thunderstorms. While we may think of lightning as a life safety issue, it also affects our cultural resources. Those in the Midwest are probably familiar with the famous highway landmark built in 2004 named Touchdown Jesus. 62 feet tall and 40 feet wide, it was totally destroyed by a lightning strike that caused the plastic foam and fiberglass to go up in flames, leaving but the blackened steel frame. If you have outdoor collections, be aware that art displayed in open air can fall victim to damage by lightning. And here are 3 other examples of damage. The lightning damage to the historic church in Brooklyn, New York, and you got to believe there are a lot of tall buildings there, rendered it basically unusable in July 2012. There's a huge hole in the roof. I think you can see it there with the steeple. 1 gentleman was killed, and one of the stained glass windows was completely destroyed. The event closed all buildings-based programs and all activities for several weeks, and the streets were closed to pedestrian and vehicular traffic for 6 days due to structural instability. So think what kind of plan they needed to bring their business up, not to mention to stabilize the building itself. Now, the Civil War Memorial statue that's on the upper right, that's been a part of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania since the 1870s, and it's clearly now heavily damaged following an apparent lightning strike. The force of the blast knocked the pedestal out from under the statue and took off the gentleman's head. That happened in 2011. And the Gilded Angel atop the newly constructed Eau Claire Mountain Temple in Utah has a really nice black arm. It was the result of being struck by lightning in June of 2009. In spite of a lightning rod to protect the building, you can see the rod emerging from the top of the statue's head. Now, their mitigation solution was to put a double rod through the statue. Now, moving on to another weather event, we think of lightning, blizzards, hail, and tornadoes as being severe and dangerous, yet the climatological basis for them is a thunderstorm. There can be as many as 40,000 thunderstorms each day around the world. They are the most common in the U.S., where they can produce not just hail and tornadoes, but floods and really damaging winds. Now, floods are the most frequent and costly of natural disasters. Around 90% of the damage caused by natural disasters is caused by floods and their associated flow of debris. Evaluating your risk to flood hazards and taking protective measures is a good practice that will indeed save you valuable time in recovery, lots of energy, and save your resources for probably doing the things you'd rather do. There are several different types of floods can affect us depending on your geography. They can be river or urban floods. We can have flash floods and ice jams, and we can also have coastal floods. So coastal, urban, river, and flash floods all produce wet, and contaminated collections that require costly and lengthy recovery procedures to remediate not just the physical damage, but the hazards from mold, sewage, oil, and multiple chemicals that float in on the waters. Flooding along rivers is a natural and inevitable part of life. Some floods occur seasonally when winter or spring rains, coupled with melting snows, fill river basins with too much water too quickly. This is a hazard to cultural sites along our major rivers, as we saw last time for the Czech Museum in Iowa. And here at this landmark railway station in Mississippi, it also happened there. These are the easiest to predict and will usually provide ample warning to protect collections if you remain alert to flood watches and warnings from forecasters, and if you have a plan. Now, urban and flash flooding, however, can often be much less predictable. During periods of these types of flooding, streets can become swift-moving rivers, while basements can become truly death traps as they fill with water. These types of flooding happened just this year at the Virginia Living Museum, and bless them, they actually had it twice, the Montreal Museum of Art, and last year at the Kentucky Derby Museum. To find out about your risk of flood, inquire about area flood plans, as well as how water drains during heavy and sudden downpours around your facility. So ask your facility manager, look at the corners of your buildings where the rain comes in, your storms really come. For instance, I think in the Southwest, most of your storms come from the Southwest, and that is the corner at which you probably have the most damage to your building. Now, a different type of flooding is coastal flooding. Winds generated from tropical storms and hurricanes or intense offshore low-pressure systems can drive ocean waters inland and cause significant flooding in a very short time. This comes with salt water and sand, in addition to a range of hazardous contaminants, again, from sewage, road oils, and area industrial byproducts. Now, the highly covered Frankenstorm in 2012, or Hurricane Sandy, ravaged communities across hundreds of miles of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island coastline, with coastal flooding and storm surges of record heights. Art galleries, cultural centers, and museums have been devastated throughout those areas by the event, and many are still today, 3+ months later, still without electricity. Even the new 9/11 museum was flooded with 5 feet or more of water. So coastal flooding, though, is not a threat to just the East and Gulf Coast. Coastal flooding is also a hazard to the West Coast and Alaska and out in Hawaii. Aloha. The cause is sea waves that they all know are called tsunamis, sometimes referred to as tidal waves. These waves are produced by earthquakes or volcanic activity. In recent weeks, a number of earthquakes and tsunami warnings have been activated in these regions, especially in the Northwest and Alaska. You may have heard, too, of a tsunami in the Solomons that just happened this week. That was 5 feet, and that's a really significant height. It's not just a little tiny little wave that comes in. It's a wall that's 5 feet high that goes hundreds of feet thick. So tsunamis are very treacherous. So I want to close out this portion of natural hazards induced by weather by reminding you that many flooding events are initiated by tropical cyclone weather patterns. Tropical cyclones are among nature's most powerful and destructive phenomena. A tropical cyclone weather pattern, it's the scientific climatological term for a storm that is spawned above the equator and turns counterclockwise. This weather pattern, depending on its strength and the size, is then broken down into the weather terms you may be more familiar with: tropical depression, tropical storm, hurricane, and major hurricane. Now, most of you may think these systems are restricted to the east and the Gulf or the West Coast, But don't fool yourselves. For those of you in the Southwest, the torrential rains you get are the tail end from either of these East or West Coast weather systems that are ending up where you are. That's part of why you get all of that rain. And those of you in Vermont and upstate New York who took the brunt of damage from Hurricane Irene in 2011 with those massive flooding and washouts, they were not seen in many decades. So this hopefully will remind all of you as listeners that listening to and taking action on flood watches and warnings issued by forecasters is important for all of you. Because really, after all, until 2012, only the movie industry thought that New York City could be inundated and stopped in its tracks by a horrific natural disaster that started as a cyclonic tropical system way down south. So now I have included in the resource packet a tropical cyclone preparedness sheet. It's been produced by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they provide background information on the different classification of storms, including hurricanes. So you may want to look at it as a reference. So from the wet stuff, we're going to work into a natural hazard here that's a wildfire. It's one of the scariest natural disasters to me because by their own nature, they can create their own weather systems and they can burn uncontrollably. Wildfires burn over 9.2 million acres in the U.S. annually. The above interactive map of the U.S. by the Defense Council of Natural Resources shows how many wildfires were burning on just one day in June of this year across the country. When you look at information by state, like Idaho there, for example, they experienced in 2012 a total of 152 large wildfires. So there's a heightened risk to our national parks and tribal nation lands in the West and Southwest, especially those in Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Many have cultural resources in the direct path of those fires that are at risk of total annihilation. So identifying fire management agencies in your region and coordinating your needs for the evacuation and protection of your cultural resources with those responding agencies is important to do in advance. And the website that I have up here on the slide, that is how you can track current incidents. You can go on there and see what wildfires are actually happening now in the country. The U.S. Forest Service Incident Information System, they track that and host that website. So besides the risk of total destruction from the heat and flames from a wildfire, the presence of invisible or visible airborne particulates is also a hazardous threat to the preservation of collections. Often invisible to the naked eye, these insidious and often noxious airborne hazards are not only life, safety, and health issues, but have the harmful potential to bring acidic and abrasive materials in direct contact with your collections through open windows or your heating and cooling ductwork. This impacts the long-term preservation of collections, and it requires costly, labor-intensive actions to remove accumulations from the collections themselves. So make sure you can shut down your HVAC systems, your heating and ventilation systems, and make sure, of course, you close your windows. Now, not to be undone by natural hazards of wildfires, volcanic eruptions, once active, can also cause havoc. Alaska and Hawaii have active volcanoes and are well versed in the health and safety risks from volcanic ash and harmful gases infiltrating buildings and accumulating on collections. Ash fallout impacts transportation, closing down many major airline routes and roadways, which in turn can impact how quickly you can initiate a response and recovery. So those of you in states within this map also need to take note of this hazard and include an evaluation of the risk to earthquakes as you plan. Even those volcanoes far from the continental United States pose a threat, as like wildfires, those airborne particulates can travel great distances on jet streams, disrupting a large geographic area with, again, ash deposits. The Mexican volcano, with that unpronounceable name that we nickname Popo, is an example of such a hazard downwind of the southwest border. So those of you north of that, those are our southwest states, that actually is a hazard that you should note. However, those of you in the Midwest and the eastern part of the U.S. that are less at risk of eruptions, please don't sigh a breath of relief yet, because you may be spared from active volcanoes in your region, but you are not spared from the risk of earthquakes. This earthquake in 2011 shook 1,500 miles along the East Coast. Extensive damage occurred in the mid-Atlantic states, and even 100 miles from the epicenter, structural damage happened to the Smithsonian's Suitland Storage Facility, the National Museum of American Indian, and the iconic castle on the National Mall. So regardless of where you live in the country, your plan needs to identify your risk to earthquakes and the effect they can have on your collections. But now that we're on a shake, rattle, and roll road here, I'm not going to stop here. Earthquakes are not the only ground-shaking geological hazard for you to consider. Collapsible soils, landslides, and sinkholes are three types of geological hazards that may challenge the foundations of your buildings and topple your collections, if not covering them with slimy mud and debris. Be sure to evaluate your risk to this hazard, and I'll give you tips what resources to look at a little later in this webinar. So landslides, they're caused by clay soils deposited in lakes as glaciers melted, and are much more common than people realize. They happen in every state, yet they are the least studied of the natural disasters, and they are really difficult to anticipate. Western Pennsylvania currently has the highest landslide hazard rating in the country, yet slow-moving landslides of an inch or so a year are not so uncommon, particularly in the West. For instance, North Salt Lake City in Utah has been on the move since 1998. Collapsible soils, they differ from landslides due to the composition of the soil and how it reacts to moisture or the lack of moisture. They are more common in the Southwest. They occur with the addition of water to the naturally dry soil and usually are caused by a septic tank, a leaky municipal water line, and runoffs from roads. So those of you in New Mexico and Arizona, ask your first responders if they have seen those incidents happen in your area, or if you have facility managers, ask them. Now the other part of geological hazards here, collapsible soils, or sinkholes. And they're less frequent, but they're even more devastating when they happen. They happen in areas where the rock below the land surface is limestone, carbonate rock, salt beds, or rocks that can be naturally dissolved by groundwater circulating through them. As the rock dissolves, spaces and caverns develop underground. Sinkholes are really dramatic because the land usually stays intact for a while until the underground space just gets too big. And then when there's not enough support for the land above the space, a sudden collapse of the land surface just occurs. Boom. So the most damage from sinkholes tends to occur in Florida, Texas, Alabama, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. So information on sinkholes is provided by the Water Management School at the U.S. Geological Survey. And there's information on a website in the resource package. So those of you who want to can look there. All right, now we're getting to the end of this section. Now that we've looked at a range of natural and man-made hazards, the question relevant probably to this webinar is, what do you do now? The answer is you identify as many of these hazards to which your site is at risk as you can. and you rank them by probability and effect. So remember this chart from the last class? As part of your homework, take each hazard you've identified and place it in the appropriate quadrant of the chart. For instance, if the likelihood of flooding is high and its effect on your building and or on the collection is also high, you'd place it in the upper left quadrant. If you're not in a quake-prone zone, there's a low probability of an earthquake occurring. But if one were to occur, its impact might be high. So that would be placed in the upper right quadrant. If you live inland and the chance of a tsunami is low, as is its impact, you'd place that in the lower right quadrant. So once you've assigned each external hazard to a quadrant, you will have a better understanding of what hazards you need to focus on. These are the hazards that you should prepare for first, the ones that have a high probability of occurring and that can have a high effect or impact on your collection. So we'll explore more risk management tips in our last class, but this exercise should help map out the hazards in a reasoned way that helps chart your next steps for preparedness. So I'll show you where to identify your hazards in the next few slides, but first I need to break for some water, and I'd be glad to take some questions.
Great, thank
Jenny?
you, Alex. All right, so we're going to do a similar question to what we did the first time, and this time we're focusing on those natural disasters, and we're curious. We, of course, hope the answer is no, but has your institution been affected by a natural disaster? And you can choose all that apply, all that have impacted you. And I do have a few questions here.
Yes, I'd be glad to take questions, Jenny.
Okay. So on our last poll question, we did have quite a few people who said other, Alex, and some of the responses were things I wouldn't have even thought of. Someone said a recarpeting project caused dust. Another person said removal of an out-of-commission nuclear reactor might cause vibrations, and they're not sure. So, but the most common one was burst pipes and leaks. So, Alex, I have a question for you about how can you prevent that from happening?
Well, you have to check your installation. One of the really good things to do to minimize the damage is to put in backflow valves. And that's a plumbing issue. What happens there is when a pipe bursts because the water has frozen in it, the water then will begin to also flow back down the pipe. And there's a valve there that will stop that from happening. And it also stops more water coming in from wherever your main water source is. Another way to stop this from happening, if you know you're going to have prolonged periods of cold and you're in a smaller location or a smaller historic site, for instance, if you keep your water dripping during that cold period, it will help the water keep moving through the pipe, so it will really lessen your impact. But get to know where your leaky, cold areas of your building are. That's the big thing, and make sure you put as much insulation as you can and use those backflow pipes. And,
Great.
Get in the generator so you don't lose your electricity, too.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. So it looks like on this poll question, I'm happy to see that 90 people said no, so that's fantastic. And we're a little all over the map here with the other disasters. Thunderstorms, flood seem to be the more popular ones. So I have a question back when we were discussing man-made disasters from Amy in Utah. She's curious if there's a demonstration outside of your institution, are you responsible for life safety of the protesters?
I actually don't know that answer. I'm not an insurance person, so I would suggest that you ask your insurance vendor or your risk safety staff person. In theory, if someone walks on your property, you are responsible for them. But I would check and see.
Okay. So we had a pretty active discussion here about suppression systems. And we had a question about, do you recommend a water system, a water suppression system in every archive. A few people said that the Canadian Conservation Institute recommends that. A few other people chimed in saying they had some gas suppression systems. Alex, can you weigh in on that?
Well, in general, the dry pipe systems, the hazard with that is that they can create little tiny leaks from corrosion, from the residue that's left in the pipes, and they will spring a leak. And you don't know they're springing a leak until you really don't want it to happen. So the only dry pipe systems I believe people are advocating for are those when you feel the need to have a system in an area where you have no heat control.
Okay. All right? And Casey, I hope that answers your question about alternatives to water suppression. So there is gas, but there are, of course, issues with them all, right, Alex?
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. They even with the gas ones, the Freon, well, they're not Freon anymore. You need to be very careful how you position them, because quite often when they erupt with such a force that they actually can have condensation on whatever they land. So if it's in an area with metal shelving, if they hit the metal shelving, they will condense, and then you can actually have water forming there, which of course is not what you want. So make sure that the nozzles are pointed away from your shelving. Ask your installers about that.
Okay. We had another question from Janine in New York. She wants to know, do you have any suggestions for smaller institutions on how to engage in emergency communication in rural areas where cell phones don't always work?
Where cell phones don't always work. The words on my tongue. Well, if you have a landline, one of the reasons many of us have landlines is that our landlines will work even when the old-fashioned landlines, where you don't have a cordless phone, but you actually have a plug-in phone back in the old days, so there are no batteries in this. They actually will work. We use them here when all of our cell phones went down. So look into your using an old-fashioned princess phone and having a landline as a backup.
And would you recommend somebody commented about radios, CB radios? Would you recommend that?
Yes, CB radios are a wonderful opportunity to do that. And then even the CB radio professionals will, in a serious disaster, will communicate and send messages out for you.
Okay. We had another question when we were talking about water suppression systems and pipe leaks, and Susan was curious if you would recommend covering collection storage boxes with plastic sheeting if they're under old ceiling pipes or sprinkler systems.
Yes, I absolutely do, and I have an example of that, I think, in the next slide or in the next few slides, or the next, I can't remember, but I have exactly a good point for that. Yes, coming up, coming up, absolutely, because those sprinklers go off with an enormous force, and it's an enormous amount of water that comes out of it, even if it's only one sprinkler that's coming off.
Okay. And I had a question, and I'm not sure, Alex, this is putting you on the spot, but we were talking about weather alert programs in the United States, and was curious if you knew of any in Canada. And we can do research on that after this webinar and post it to the course page. But Alex, off the top of your head, do you happen to know of any?
I regret I do not. I'm not familiar with the Canadian response protocols. Okay. I would imagine they might, but I don't have information on that. I'm sorry, but I'm glad to look into it.
Yes, we'll definitely look into it and post it on the course website. So that's all the questions I have for right now, Alex. So if you want to keep cruising along. All
right, we're cruising along to, because I promised I'd show you where to find information on natural hazards, because this is really your homework. So this page that you see here, this is a summary of agencies and organizations that have information on what natural hazards occur in your area. You'll notice that they start with national agencies, and then they work their way down to local resources. Now, much of the gathering of raw data on our climate is the responsibility of government agencies such as the U.S. Geological Survey and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We call them NOAA. Our first responders at national, regional, and local levels use that core information to create their own information and management programs for your community. That is why your local first responders are really pretty good resources to connect with. They've done a lot of the basic research. What they don't know are the special needs these hazards can have on a response effort at your site. So let me start with NOAA here. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is the source for all weather-related information. NOAA's National Climatic Data Center, the NCDC, maintains the world's largest climate data archive and provides climatological services and data to every sector of the United States economy and to users worldwide. Records in the archive range from paleoclimatic data to century-old journals to data less than an hour old. The center's mission is to preserve this data and make them available to the public, businesses, industry, government, and researchers. And the raw data is harvested by agencies and organizations across the country, including your TV weatherman and the insurance community. Collaboration between climate scientists and many different agencies is essential in helping to build the necessary bridges that will transform the climate data into information that is useful, relevant, and credible. This year, NOAA has also made a partnership with the Federal Emergency Management Agency to promote the National Severe Weather Preparedness Week, which is March 3rd to the 9th this year, to inform the public about severe weather hazards and provide knowledge that can be used to take action. As part of the National Severe Weather Preparedness Week, they have developed a toolkit with templates designed to aid in informing the public about severe weather. Within the toolkit, you can find press releases, blog posts, opinion editorials, and talking points and social media tools. So you can check out the program in the resource packet for this class if you want. So you can get a clue of the number of other agencies that take the data if you just Google the type of hazard or the weather phrase you are interested in and your state. For instance, just Google landslide hazards in North Carolina, all of you tuning in from North Carolina. Up will come a large list of resources that can present interesting learning opportunities. Here's an example of Googling severe weather incidents. The website is in your resource packet. This informative, interactive website is produced by the Natural Resources Defense Council. The nonprofit agency developed interactive maps showing the 2011 and 2012 extreme weather events across the country. You can view events as they happen simultaneously across the country by date, and you can also click on your state to find out what severe weather events happen in your area. Try it. It's really pretty fun. For instance, here's what Montana experienced in 2012. They experienced a total of 59 broken heat records, 16 broken snow records, 17 broken precipitation records, and 128 large wildfires. Now, NOAA also hosts the National Weather Center. The Weather Center is divided into 6 regions covering the central, eastern, southern, western, Alaskan, and Pacific regions. Each region provides information specific to its geographic areas. They are good places to start when you look for information on types of natural hazards in your area. This is a screenshot of the Southwest Regional Office. You will notice along the headings at the top where it's circled, there's a tab for natural hazards specific to New Mexico. If you click on this tab, it will take you to a list of hazards in New Mexico to explore by subject. Other regions may include other information, such as the Alaskan region will post information on earthquakes and tsunamis, in addition to other weather-related hazards. Now, another core resource for data and information is provided through the U.S. Geological Survey Natural Hazards website. The USGS Geological Hazards Science Center hosts information on 4 programs. They are the Earthquake Hazards Program, the Landslide Hazards Program, the Geomagnetism Program, and the Global Seismographic Network. They all have hazard maps and data for many states. So check it out and see what you can find for your state. Now, drilling down the list a little further to state natural resource agencies, you may find other good sources for geological hazards specific to your state. For example, here is a screenshot of the Colorado Geological Survey. It's from the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. Now, quite often, these state sites complement and tailor information you may have seen in other NOAA or USGS sites. So just look and see what you can find. So also, along the same sort of working down state level, you can go to your state emergency management agency. They also have valuable resources for you to explore online. This is an example from Ohio. By clicking on the hazard icon of whichever one you're interested in, you will find the specific information on that hazard and its effect and occurrence at least in this state for Ohio. So, Jenny, I need another little bit of water. I'm glad to break for questions here, too.
Okay.
Are there any questions, or shall I just drink and keep moving?
Well, take a drink. I had a question earlier from Robert, and I might have an answer to it. So Robert was curious about what other cultural institutions around the world are doing, especially in war-torn areas, about civil unrest. And Robert, I can kind of speak to that a little bit. We were fortunate enough to be invited to an Iraq Museum Professionals program that was hosted here at the George Washington University, in obviously a very small sector of professionals, maybe only 10, but they did mention that they do have some plans in place, and one of the biggest things that they do is when they know something is going to happen, they grab all of their objects and they run it down into the basement. So less of a plan, more of a kind of reaction, but I hope that answers your question a little bit. And Alex, if you want to comment, it's a little bit out of the realm of what we're talking about here, but
some countries are better prepared than others. Actually, the field of conservation was started by U.S. Servicemen who went over to Europe and helped empty and relocate collections in the Louvre, in the British Museum, and in many European collections. And they packed them up and put them way down deep in the salt mines in different areas. But in a lot of areas where they have fewer resources and fewer other countries that are participating, they are on their own. Certainly you've heard of stories in the Middle East. Certainly we've had some problems in Egypt at their main museum. So cultural resources are not as tightly protected as we are lucky to be here in the United States.
Definitely an interesting subject, though.
Yes, absolutely. All right, shall I keep moving on?
Definitely.
All right, so we'll go into some tips to working with your first responders, because a little closer to home, you can find your area information on local hazards, both at a university safety office, if any of you are near universities, and with your local emergency managers. For you in your rural areas, you may need to explore a bit further afield and try at your county level to make contact with the person responsible for emergency management in your area. Because all first responders, really, their jobs are to protect the campus students or the community at large. And they will already be aware of the natural and man-made hazards in your area, And so they can really share that information with you. And because they are also dedicated to serving their community, they will be interested in the contributions your institution makes to the community, and they really want to work with you. It's part of their job description. That means part of your crafting your own plan means reaching out and connecting with your first responders, because really they may not know you would exist. And as our Rhode Island Emergency Management Director told me, waiting until a disaster happens is no time to exchange your business cards. Now, if you aren't sure how to begin or how to further strengthen the relationships, here are some tips for working with your first responders. You can make your fingers do the walking with a phone call to introduce yourself and your institution. A visit to their office for a bit of eye-to-eye contact and a handshake is another good way to begin, and usually sort of cements the deal a little better. But really, what's that phrase? The Army travels on its stomach? If you feel the need to smooth the way, it can be as easy as taking some cookies or lunch to the fire station or police or sheriff's department with your marketing information. And remember, too, there may be multiple shifts to meet, so plan accordingly. You can build on that initial contact and invite the first responders to your institution. An event provides an engaging and low-key opportunity to introduce your site to them and raise your visibility. Offering them passes for families or even a family membership is another way to sustain the relationship and show how you value their services. And it's low-key, so you don't have to talk shop, so to speak, right away. You can offer to personalize the visit if you want and give them a behind-the-scenes tour. You can tell them about your site and how you were responsible for the care of many irreplaceable cultural resources and the collaborative history, perhaps, that you're taking care of for the community. Maybe if you're a historic site, you can reiterate that what you have are important icons for the community identity, and saving them in the face of a disaster is an important morale booster. And this was a lesson learned by FEMA after Katrina, because FEMA was, the cultural resources were not on their radar at that point. Let them be aware, too, that cultural institutions can be central to the recovery phase of an area-wide disaster. Libraries and larger buildings can be used as gathering places, information centers, and education resources. For a number of places in my area of the country, they offer their spaces as their public spaces for people to recharge their cell phones and their laptops. An effective way to keep growing your relationship is to invite first responders to participate in a training drill with you. It could be as simple as participating in one simple activity to honor, say, May Day, a national campaign that promotes emergency preparedness in our cultural institutions. In support of this initiative, you could ask first responders to refresh everyone on how and when to use the different types of fire extinguishers, or you could conduct facility tours for them to tell them about and show them what your priority collections are. And if you have an established relationship of some sort and you want to step up to the next level of collaboration with first responders, here's an interesting interactive way to show you are taking your planning and preparedness really seriously. Explore the Great Shakeouts website. Participating in the Great Shakeout program, that's an earthquake preparedness drill, shows that your institution wants to do the utmost to protect your cultural resources and that you are taking risks from natural hazards really seriously. Yet, here's another way to build those relationships. As cultural stewards, you know a lot about your collections and how to manage them. But how much do you really know about what makes your building safe and what the nuts and bolts of fire codes entail? Raise your own awareness and ask for help with a walkthrough just to learn about the protective measures in place. First responders are trained in this, and they're a helpful resource for explaining fire code information. For example, Do you know how to do a load-bearing test on your exit lights to ensure they will last 90 minutes in case of an electrical outage? Or what about all those red and black panels throughout the building? First responders can explain the alarm panel system to you and inform you about smoke evacuation capabilities of your heating and ventilating air conditioning system. They can also help you identify the different doors you have and explain the different fire ratings for each doors. And as well as give you suggestions for what to do, like close them on the way out, or if you have automatic closures when the alarm goes off. Another thing is, do you know if your fire hydrants are properly sized for their equipment, and if there is enough water pressure in your area for a response? Your fire chief can help you identify fire stops in your building too, especially if you have a historic building that's gone through any kind of upgrade or rehab. That would be really important for him to know as well as for you. And they can even help you better understand the range and force of water when the sprinklers go off. This harks back to a question we just had. In the lower right-hand corner, the image there is from an institution that thought they were well prepared for a fire with a sprinkler system in the textile storage room. But when they learned from the fire responders how much water comes out of the sprinkler head and under what pressure, they realized the importance of adding plastic covers and tying them down over the shelving. As we spoke of before, we said that an element of a disaster plan is communication. I ask that you think about taking the initiative to ask your local fire and police responders how they would work in response to an alarm at your site and how you can help them if it should happen at your site, regardless of what your staff responsibility is here. That means your first responders, they respond to an emergency following a very well-oiled and defined management and command structure. You may not be aware of this, but when an incident requires them to come on site, they will be in control of your facility until they turn it back over to you. You and all staff will be required to stay on the outside of the caution tape. Understanding the process will show them your interest in working with them and prepare you to know the kinds of information they will need from you in order for them to make the most timely response. So understanding this chain of command and reporting structure can be confusing, especially if you're a separate organization within another governing authority, like a library within a university or a museum within a government agency. Universities often have their own layer of safety in their and response. So when, for instance, they usually have their own police department and maybe a safety officer, but they commonly rely on the town fire department for fires. So the people at the university who would normally hand it over to you, that you would normally maybe talk to, and they would say, okay, you can go back in the building, they have to wait for the release from the fire department. So knowing from whom you take instruction and how you communicate information is important in these really more complex scenarios. So find out how that works in your particular incident. Ask your first responders, too, what they need to know from you about your staff, your facility, and your organization. The more information you have prepared in advance, the easier it will be to salvage your collections and maintain a good relationship with emergency responders. For instance, for a response during public hours, let them know your evacuation meeting up spot. This allows for a really timely exchange of information as the incident evolves. The emergency responders may need information on, say, visitors or staff with special needs that they might have to go enter the building to help evacuate them. Or if you anticipate any program groups arriving for a scheduled event, they'd need to know that so they can meet them and greet them. At this location, you can also hand over information they may need, such as floor plans that detail building layouts, could have your identification of hazardous and priority collection locations, master keys, the utility locations, and even building names if you are in one of several buildings. So there are lots of ideas as to what you might be able to do to build that relationship. And as a refresher on ways to approach your first responder or what sorts of questions to ask, either before an emergency, during an emergency, or after an emergency, this poster is a handy resource for your planning team. It is a free download from Heritage Preservation. The website's here, and it's also in your resource packet. It identifies topics to discuss and the kinds of questions the first responders might have from you. And another insider tip I have is consider asking one of your first responders as a private citizen to join your planning team. Having him or her come out of uniform can be less intimidating to everybody, and this is especially helpful if you're in a rural area and you're a little hesitant to have them come into your building, because in many cases in rural areas, many of our smaller cultural resources are a little like fun houses in that they're a little overcrowded and they're a little bit difficult to access, and they already know that they have some fire hazards here. So if you ask your first responders, you find one who's friendly, just to come out of uniform, he can share his experience without having to officially make recommendations. So I understand this webinar has probably been pretty densely packed with information. Do refer to the resource packet to find the resources I've highlighted here. But in order to give you some time, we are at the end of the webinar. I'm glad to take questions, or if you want to email me things as you go along, I'm glad to help you. So Jenny, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yeah, and as Alex mentioned, there is a handout. She has been kind enough to compile all these resources for you, and that is on our course webpage. I'm going to quickly pull over the homework assignment. So this is for today's webinar. And again, that's also linked to on the course homepage, but there it is for you right now. And I'm going to pull over our group login. So this is only for people who did not enter their first, last name, and location when entering this room. This is for all our people who are watching in groups. So one of you probably logged in, and if that group leader could go ahead and type in here who you're watching with. And if you're watching by yourself, no need to worry. You don't need to tell us. We got you marked down as having attended. All right. We have about 5 more minutes. So Alex, I have 2 really great questions. One is from Susan. She's curious about as they start to plan their disaster plan. She says, it looks like we should probably involve our building manager. She says they rent space in a large office building. Would you recommend that as they start working on their emergency plan?
That would be a wonderful suggestion, because he will know the facility. He'll be able to give plans. He'll be able to tell you what the security issues are. Quite often, they also will be able to help you with that walkthrough in terms of identifying, do we have fire doors, and is this a 2-hour rating or a 1-hour rating, and do they close automatically, and how often are fire extinguishers checked? So, yes, that would be a fabulous addition to your planning team.
Okay. I have another question from Michael. He's curious what you think about taking ICS training courses. So if I'm correct, Incident Command System?
That is the Incident Command System.
All right.
And you can take the first 100 and 200 level course online for free through Federal Emergency Management Agency. So you can just Google in ICS 100 or ICS 100 and 200, and it will come up with the website. They take a couple of hours to do, and it'll give you the basic understanding for it. And then at least you'll know the same language as your first responders, and you'll be understanding how they are organizing their response. And then you can also train your own staff. Sometimes the first responders also have community courses, which make it a little user-friendly. And depending on your area of the country, if you have any disaster training workshops through conservators or through any sort of cultural resources, some of those disaster workshops also begin to alert you to that terminology and ask you to frame your response team following the same kind of command structure.
Great. And Tracy asked if we could post links to those training courses, and we will definitely do that, Tracy. That's all the questions that I have.
Well, that's wonderful. We only have a couple minutes left.
We're set. Perfect timing.
Can I just encourage everybody to tune in for the next one? We have some, it's really interesting, even if you are just focused on one material. I encourage you to come to this really interesting webinar on hazards in your collection. You can help your colleagues and your sister institutions be a good buddy.
And Lori Foley with Heritage Preservation has pointed out that a great book is Implementing the Incident Command System at the Institutional Level, a handbook for libraries, archives, museums, and other cultural institutions. And we'll make sure to put a link of that up. So again, homework, a link to the homework assignment can be found here, but it's also on the course page. And I just want to say we have over 150 homework assignments already turned in, so great job, guys. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again on Tuesday, next Tuesday, the 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern, same place. So have a fantastic afternoon.